Alrighty, so we're working with string manipulations, and from our prior knowledge, we've learned how to get strings as a form of an input, store them into a variable, and concatenate them, or join them together in a sentence. And then we can output them using print. So what we're going to be doing now is introduce the idea that we can manipulate strings and work with them in several different ways to produce useful information. We can still print the string or print a string combination. So my name in this example is Brina. So our learning goals and objectives are to be able to read, comprehend, and trace and adapt, as well as create code that can be or that will be using len to count the number of characters in a string, the get car to get a single character from a string, then use substrings to get a sequence of characters from a string, and then change the casing to convert caps from lowercase to uppercase and vice versa. So some theory. What is a string? As we know before, it's still a data type from Python, and essentially all data gets stored in a string and is treated as text, even if that data is a numerical character. So the string data is then surrounded by quotations, so wherever you see, it will always resemble this. So this is a string, and whenever you create a variable, it would be the variable name equals whatever the string that you want, surrounded by quotations. Now we'll be applying functions. So just briefly, what are functions? We have already learned how to create our own functions, so we're just going to take advantage of some of the built-in functions and then describe what kind of functions we are creating. They're essentially a preset section of code that performs a common task, and they have a name. Normally they may require some parameters, and they return a value for said program. So we're going to give them a function name and a specific parameter inside of the parentheses. In this case, if there are two, there will be parameter 1 and parameter 2, followed by whatever should be executed inside of this function, and the last thing will be return. So we're using len, which returns the number of characters in a string, and it essentially counts the number of characters in a string and returns that number to the program. What would the following functions call return? So whenever you do len for orange, you get however many characters there are here. The same thing for computing and hello world. And any spaces or symbols are still considered as actual characters inside a string. So we can do len into a variable, which would mean that we find whatever the length of a string is, and then we store it inside of a variable. We give this variable a sensible name so that we know what is contained within it, and we're using len to basically count the actual spaces and put that specific number inside the variable for later usage. And we can also use len from input, where we ask a user for an input, in this case to enter a word, and then we find the length of that word. We keep that number inside of word length, and then we can print that number to display it to our user. And when we're using len of an input, we can make it more efficient by just simply having a variable word have the input from our user and then print the actual length of the word in just one line. So we use len with a selection. After we use a variable to store the input from our user, we can then store the length of that word inside of the variable called word length, and if that variable is greater than 50, we can display a message saying, whoa, that's a long word. We can also make this more efficient by simply checking what the length of the word is as part of the condition inside of our if statement, and then display the message if the word is longer than 10, or else just print the word is short. Now we can use char our chart to start using string slicing. So whenever we use this, we get a single character from a string. And then Python treats strings like list, so each character is given its own index starting at 0, just like so. So whenever you're using slices, you can get a character. Since we're treating the actual strings as list, we can then give the specific location for any specific character and extract that, or we can make individual slices so that we can potentially replace or update what we have inside of our string. Now, we would do so by creating little cuts that would become our substrings. So any little section of a string that was formed from a previous string would be your substring. And as we're making our actual slices, we can take something from an example like phrase, where you have hello world, and make a cut starting at location 2 all the way to index 5, and then print that subphrase. So this will include whatever is at 2, but character 5 is not included since we're stopping right before that. So we can make this more efficient by simply adding that to a print statement so we can immediately see what will be printed. And just before we move on, we do want to add immutability to this. So whenever we use strings, they are identified inside of Python as being immutable, meaning that they cannot be changed after they are created. So you can't use the simple notation to replace an element inside of the string with a new letter. Instead, the procedure that you want to do is to make a particular variable that will have the actual slices of your string, and then the updated part that you want to insert or remove from the actual string. That way, whenever you print this, you're making a new variable that contains the updated string. You didn't actually change the original one, you just made a new string from that original string. So why do we use this? Essentially, it makes it so that strings can be consistent, and it helps us avoid unintended side effects in our programs. Meaning that if you wanted to store information that is very important, you could keep it as text. This it's not really going to change for the original variable. If that were to be a change were to be needed, then you just create a new variable from that original one. So whenever we're using strings, we need to be using slicing, concatenation, and our built-in methods to create a new string. Now, we move on to casing, and we can use upper to create uppercase letters and lower to create lowercase letters. And what you do is you apply either upper or lower to the string that you're working with, and it will be doing the corresponding operation. So if we want to make it more efficient, you just add it inside of the print statement, and you can also add the actual condition inside of your if statement to check whether or not you have the right thing. So our key concepts were, once again, we were working with strings. As an example, data types. We have seen a few others, and essentially we were just using our strings and treating them as text, which could contain numerical characters. We cannot do any traditional math to them, but we can use the logical operator equals to compare it to a new string. Now, once we do that, we started applying our functions so that we can then search for or identify specific components of our string. Some strings take their prior string as a single parameter and then return the actual value. Now, we won't be using print within our actual functions because we're using return to deliver the information that we need. We will be testing whether or not the function works accordingly by using a print statement afterwards. Now, the advantages of using built-in functions is that it saves us time, and these functions have already been pre-tested so that we know that they work. There's a lot of different string functions. They use some of the most common ones within these nodes, and whenever we're making substrings or slices, they just return a sequence of characters from a string. Python uses slices to do this. Whenever you're using your slices, you're treating the string as a list, so each character is given an index from 0 all the way to the end of whatever the length of that string is. Alright, that should be it.